Hello everyone, welcome back to another week. I hope you're ready for today's video because I am bringing together a lot of the topics that I have covered over the past few weeks. And by now, if you've been watching, you'll have seen my videos on high blood pressure, blood sugars, and cholesterol. And the reason I've spent so much time talking about these issues was to set the scene for what we'll be discussing today. Now, over the last few years, there's been a global epidemic of a certain condition that I feel has been traveling very much under the radar, especially when the world had other pandemics to worry about. But this has been there the entire time, slowly becoming more and more of an issue, and we just don't hear about it enough. Now, I'm talking about something called metabolic syndrome, and if you haven't heard of this before, that's okay because I will be explaining it all in today's video. At a basic level, metabolic syndrome is the name that we give when a group of health conditions exist together in a person. Now, there are 5 key pieces to the puzzle that is metabolic syndrome, and in this case, you don't really want to collect all the pieces, but we need to know what they are if we want to avoid them. So the 5 key conditions involved in the syndrome are central obesity, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high triglycerides, and low HDL cholesterol. Now, hopefully by now some of these terms are familiar, but don't worry, I'll go a bit deeper into each of these now. So starting with central obesity. Now, I haven't gone into obesity in any of my videos yet, but that's mainly because I feel like we all kind of get the point about what it is. But when it comes to metabolic syndrome, it's not just a high BMI that matters, it's actually your waist circumference that's important. So central obesity is to do with the amount of fat that there is in the abdominal area, so in the middle of your body, in the tummy area, which is why rather than looking at BMI, we would actually get the waist circumference. Now, I have included this table here which shows what waist circumference numbers would put you at risk of having metabolic syndrome. It actually does depend on your ethnicity, but if you take me, for example, I would need to look at the numbers relevant to Asian populations, and so if my waist circumference was over 80 centimeters, then that's too high, and I tick one of the boxes for metabolic syndrome. Now, the next thing is high blood pressure. So if your systolic blood pressure, the top number, is 130 or over, or your diastolic, the bottom number, is 85 or over, then you are at risk. With blood pressure, your doctor will need to diagnose that, but if you are seeing these numbers, maybe get them properly looked at. Now, if you are someone that is on medication for high blood pressure, then you automatically fit the criteria. Now, next up, high blood sugar. A fasted blood sugar level is used, which means you fast for 8 to 10 hours before getting a blood test. If that ends up being more than 5.5 millimoles per liter, then that fits the criteria for metabolic syndrome. Again, if you're already on medication for type 2 diabetes, then you automatically fit the criteria. Now, the last 2 are a part of the lipid profile test, which I talked about in the video that I did on cholesterol. Click here if you missed that one. But if you remember, HDL was what everyone referred to as good cholesterol, and we like to see this number being a little bit higher. Now, having an HDL of less than 1 millimole per liter if you are a man, or less than 1.3 millimoles per liter if you are a woman, then you would fit the criteria for metabolic syndrome. Now, in the same test that gives you your HDL levels, you will also get a triglyceride level, and this is a type of fat that is found in your blood, and if it's too high, over 1.7 millimoles per liter, then it might fit the criteria for having metabolic syndrome. Again, if you are already taking medications for these, then you will automatically fit the criteria. So those are the 5 key parts to metabolic syndrome. Your doctor will be the one to give the final diagnosis because they will investigate and see where you stand with all the tests. But if you have any 3 of the 5 risk factors that I just covered, then that is usually what the doctor would say is a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. Now, just so you're all aware, I did use Australian-based guidelines when I was giving all those numbers, so it may be slightly different in other countries, but it's just to give you all an idea so that you're aware of what you may be at risk for. Now, at this point, you might actually want to know why it's called metabolic syndrome. You also may not care at all, but for some reason I was curious, so I looked it up. So metabolism is all about the processes that your body goes through to essentially turn the food that you eat into energy. And so it's called metabolic syndrome because all the health conditions that I just went through have a direct impact on your metabolism. They all influence how your body makes and stores energy. Sugars and fats all turn into energy eventually. And so if you have metabolic syndrome, then your metabolic profile is altered. And that's what leads to all the issues with your health that can come from having metabolic syndrome. So what issues, you may be asking? Why do you need to care about metabolic syndrome? The main reason is that when you have all the conditions that make up the syndrome, your risk of heart disease, stroke, getting diabetes, and other health problems drastically goes up. And I don't know how many times I have said on this channel that heart disease is the #1 cause of death globally. So the more people there are that have metabolic syndrome, the more people there are at risk of heart disease. And I can quite safely say that the numbers of people having metabolic syndrome are only increasing. A study released in 2022, so that's just last year, found that the amount of adults with metabolic syndrome increased from 28% in 1999 to 38% in 2018. So that's gone up by 10%. And the study found that it was diabetes and obesity that were the main conditions driving these numbers up. But again, the most concerning thing that I keep running into when researching these conditions is that people are getting diagnosed at much younger ages. Things like high blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar tend to happen as people age. And so those over 65 years old make up the largest group of people that have metabolic syndrome. That makes sense. But we are seeing more people ages 20 to 45 years old getting diagnosed with the syndrome, and even scarier, we are seeing more children get diagnosed with it. Now, I couldn't find current numbers, but in 2004, it was about 4% of US children that had metabolic syndrome. I can only imagine that that has gone up a little bit in the last 20 years. But all in all, 1/3 of the US population has metabolic syndrome, and those numbers again are very similar here in Australia at about 20 to 30% of the population. So it's like I have said before, things don't happen in isolation. When you get high blood sugars, you might get high blood pressure later on, and then cholesterol levels may rise too. I see this all the time with my work. Patients come into the pharmacy and they have all these conditions together. And if you've noticed, the conditions that make up metabolic syndrome, all of them are linked to lifestyle in some way. I'm not saying it's just lifestyle that causes them. I know genetics, family history all play their part, but lifestyle drives them all. And that's actually good news because it means that we can make changes to either prevent metabolic syndrome occurring or improving your results to make one or more of these conditions go away. So hopefully you all learnt something in the video today. I wanted to really highlight why it's so important to play the long game with health. There's no quick fix, it's all about sustained change. But that means the smallest change will go a long way. Whether it's going for walks more during the week or reducing the amounts of fast food that you have, if you keep at it, you may be able to go a few more years before getting high blood pressure, for example. But I will wrap things up here for now. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like and subscribe and leave any questions in the comments. I'll see you next week, and until then, keep playing the long game.